The month of October will be another busy one on the diplomatic front, both at home and abroad. Russian leader Vladimir Putin will head to Beijing for talks with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. What will he get out of the meetup? Will Xi-Putin talks reshape and cement the Moscow-Beijing-Pyongyang partnership? And will North Korea succeed in launching what it claims to be a reconnaissance satellite this time? A handful of diplomatic developments are on the way from Russia to China and China to the U.S. And North Korea is no exception. We're joined by Jack Barton this afternoon. Welcome.
Great to be back.
All right, then Malene, Jensen, good to have you with us.
Nice to be back.
All right, Jack, I want to start with you. Russian leader Vladimir Putin is traveling to Beijing for talks with Xi Jinping. Now, how significant is Putin's visit to China, considering it's his first trip abroad since the ICC arrest warrant?
Well, it's a safe place for him to go to, given China's not a signatory, so there's no hope of him being deported to The Hague. And it is significant within limits. Of course, just before the war in Ukraine, China announced that it was the Russia-China relationship was one with no limits. And then Russia invaded Ukraine without informing China, apparently without informing Xi Jinping. We're told there's a lot of unhappiness in Beijing about that. So suddenly it became a relationship with limits. But it's still a very important partnership. China provides one of the only big markets now for Russian oil, buying it at a discount because it's not one of the sanctioned countries. And of course, Russia doesn't have many friends left in the world at the moment. And China, at least on the surface, still talks very much the talk of being a friend. So we might see some, significant outcomes. They might actually announce something out of this meeting, but above that, it's more of a photo opportunity for the two leaders to get together and send a message that, if we can't take at least tangible steps to be stronger, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region, to push back against US competition and what they both perceive to be US encroachment, they can at least send a message that worry people in Washington, that make them wonder, what are these two getting up to? But again, lots of tension still exists between Russia and China, but they're likely to keep this our enemy's enemy is our friend relationship going for quite some time.
Definitely. Russia may be anxious and even desperate to get China's back on its side for now. Now, Malene, then can we say that Xi-Putin talks will be an extension of the Putin-North Korean leader Kim Jong-un talks that we saw last month?
I would be a bit cautious to call it an extension, but I do think it's part of Russia's campaign to get more allies and get more friends, because right now, for a long time soon, Russia has been the kind of country that most people don't want to play with diplomatically. So right now, Putin has been meeting with Kim Jong-un, who is definitely right now one of his, biggest allies, in the sense that North Korea has undoubtedly 100% supported Russia and supported Putin. So in that sense, they are right now, so to speak, the best of friends. Whereas it's not the same case with China. That might also be why China was the second in round to meet with Putin. So yeah, it's not really an extension. It's more like a way of possibly creating more diplomatic relations and more friends for Russia right now.
Right, Russia may be trying to form that partnership among the three sides for now. Now, Jack, then how likely is it that Xi and Putin will discuss the possible joint drills between Moscow, Beijing, and Pyongyang?
Yeah, it's possible they will discuss this. When Sergei Shoigu, the defense minister of Russia, was in the DPRK and met with Kim Jong-un, he proposed that Russia and the DPRK and that China should get together and conduct joint drills. What we haven't heard is whether Kim Jong-un agreed to that, and certainly Beijing has been incredibly silent. There have been questions raised at the regular foreign ministry press conference, but China's been very silent on that issue. The one country that would benefit the most out of that would be North Korea, of course. China may be reluctant, but what we know is the China-Russia military exercises are just getting bigger and bigger. So they could be brought in at a novel level. We've seen the military exercises last year with the biggest joint drills between Russia and China since, and I say this with some irony, the end of what was supposed to be the end of the Cold War a few decades ago, with about 6 big drills. A lot of the maritime drills aimed at curbing US influence in the Indo-Pacific. But even those drills, we see them, you know, search and rescue at sea, some submarine drills, some resupplying. Even those, when you look at the sophistication of them, they're not very sophisticated. If it were really a wartime joint operation, the two would struggle to work closely. So even if North Korea is brought in, again, it may be symbolic, it may be to send a message to Washington more than really, you know, practicing for these three to take part in some future conflict together.
Definitely. Now, speaking of North Korea, another thing that's coming up this month is the regime's third attempt to launch what it calls reconnaissance satellite. Now, the much expected date for that is the October 10th, which is a couple of days. Now, that's the founding day, right? The party founding day. Why do you think they're doing that? They could be doing that on that day.
Well, first of all, it's North Korea's third attempt to launch one of these satellites. Their first attempt was in May, and their second attempt was in August. So it's quite common for North Korea that almost every time they send something up to space or up in the air, be it a missile or a satellite, it has some kind of political message. You could almost say that the political message and sending it at the right time is more important for North Korea than actually preparing the launch. So it possibly being October 10th has to do with the anniversary of North Korea's founding party, the Worker Party. Also in October is where Putin is expected to meet Xi in China. So that might also have some kind of impact on this. Moreover, another good indication that it might be in October is that Seoul is planning to also launch a military satellite in November, and it's very possible that North Korea will try to outrun South Korea in this sort of military spy satellite race, you could almost
competition.
say. Yeah, that's going on the Korean peninsula right now. So those might be some of the implications. But of course, I think it's also important to think about that last month, Kim Jong-un was traveling to Russia to meet Putin. And besides the talks, Kim Jong-un was also visiting several space-related places in Russia. And that could indicate maybe if Russia and North Korea has been signing some kind of arms deal, it's very likely that North Korea will have gotten access to some kind of Russian space technology, and that might mean that this launch could be successful. However, we should also take into consideration that this Putin-Kim Jong-un talk, they were only in last month, so also the chance that North Korean entrepreneurs and like spacecraft builders have actually gotten access to the information, space information, and after that already implemented them to the new missile launch. That's also, I would say, a little bit unlikely.
Definitely. It's been less than a month since Xi and Kim met up in Russia. And one possible date could be October 10th, which is in a couple of days, but also it could be after Hangzhou Asian Games, considering high officials are abroad. So that's when North Korea actually takes into account so that they don't do anything that bothers their ally, Russian officials. Now, Jack, then I have to ask you, Malene said, it's a bit unlikely that Russia has already shared that space technology with North Korea, considering it's been a couple of weeks since the two leaders met. What's your take on that?
When we talk about space technology, there's an overlap with missile technology. And if you look at the short to medium range North Korean missiles, most of them are based on Russian missiles.
Right.
So it's like a Russian missile by a different name. And when they've recovered, this is before these meetings were taking place, parts from North Korean missiles, they find Russian components in them. So it seems there's already been a lot of cooperation over the decades, and this would just be say, adding sophisticated touches to the cooperation. And there is certainly a big push in Moscow to do this. I watch a lot of Russian state television. It's a strange hobby.
They're fun.
But they talk a lot about
the
this.
footages are fun.
They do. They talk a lot about this and the need to share the technology. What North Korea really wants is more sophisticated solid fuel missiles, more reliable solid fuel. They also want not so much space technology, but the heat shield for the intercontinental ballistic missiles that can stop a nuclear warhead from burning up before it as it re-enters the atmosphere. There are some things in their missiles that are still very primitive, and this is really where it wants Russia's help. Not so much for putting satellites in space, but again, this is dual technology. And it is most likely that Russia, I think, is sharing some of this. China would be very reluctant to do it, because China doesn't want North Korea to do something it would see as crazy, dragging it into. But Russia has gone so geopolitically across the red line now that it would actually be a positive distraction for Russia if North Korea were to do something and drag the US and so yeah, it's complicated. It's very difficult. All of it is speculation, but I would imagine that there is some sharing, that it is in Russia's interest to help North Korea with its missiles.
Right. It's highly likely they have been sharing some of the space technology or missile technology, but at this time they're really making it delicate and official almost.
Right.
And now it's not just Russia and North Korea. Talks are ongoing between South Korean and Russian officials for possible Russian officials' a visit to Seoul. Now, what could they be talking about?
Well, as I said a little bit before, Russia is right now looking for friends and looking for better diplomatic relations. And historically, if we look at it, since the fall of the Soviet Union, actually, North Korea has been cooperating a lot with South Korea, more with South Korea than with North Korea, at least back then. So it's not unlikely that that Russia will try to make some better diplomatic ties with South Korea and maybe make some kind of cooperation with South Korea. So that's what Russia probably is hoping to get out of this potential visit. What South Korea might be interested in getting out of this visit is finding out what exactly was going on in Russia when Kim Jong-un was visiting. What was Kim and Putin talking about? And actually, pundits have claimed that it might be possible for Russian officials to disclose a little bit about what was going on between North Korea and Russia to South Korean diplomats. And of course, they would be very eager to know that.
Right, definitely. One possible way to get some info out of that Putin-Kim Jong-un talks recently. Now, Xi Jinping is also traveling to San Francisco for the APEC. Now, Putin and U.S. President Joe Biden will be meeting there for the first time in, I believe, 7 months, nearly 7 months. Now, would you say the U.S. has been setting a softer tone for that possible summit?
Yeah, the US is setting a softer tone, but it's always tricky when you've got electioneering coming up, particularly when you see the US and China often meet, and then the US will make some domestic announcement that will anger China and set things back. But there's definitely efforts underway. This meeting, if it happens, would follow a series of high-level visits to China recently by Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, but also Treasury Secretary, Commerce Secretary. Blinken also meeting with the Vice President in the US, and we've seen Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, meeting with his counterpart Wang Yi in Malta recently. So there's lots of diplomacy going on at the moment. There seems to be a real effort by both parties not to return things to normal. That's not going to go back to a pre-Xi Jinping level, but to stabilize the situation, to improve the situation. And certainly I think there's an appetite for that both in Beijing and Washington at the moment, particularly given the situation with Russia and China growing closer and closer with Russia, is to draw Beijing back, not exactly into the orbit of Washington again, but to get relations on a better foot. So yeah, I think that is the aim, But of course, in a democracy, you need to give out political messages, and whether Biden can do this without saying something afterwards, particularly on Taiwan or other issues that doesn't upset the Chinese again, we'll have to wait and see.
Right. China is definitely walking on eggshells, especially considering the fact that China has the least to get out of that Moscow-Beijing-Pyongyang partnership that Russia is so desperate to gain. Now, another major diplomatic event upcoming is the summit between the leaders of South Korea, Japan, and Beijing. Now, that hasn't taken place for a long time, Malene. Now, how meaningful will that summit be?
Well, I think it really depends on if it will even happen and how long it will take and what will be discussed. It's important to notice that these summits were actually an ongoing annual event until 2019, where Japan and Korea refused to meet due to some dispute about forced labor and sexual slavery during World War II. But now, since Yoon Suk-yeol took over administration last year, the diplomatic ties between South Korea and Japan have improved so much that now finally this summit can actually take place one more time, and it's South Korea's turn to host it. So there has been talks that it might happen by the end of December this year. So it might be a possibility. Again, if we look at what each country wants, then it seems like South Korea and Japan have similar needs, where Beijing wants maybe something different. I think what Beijing is looking to secure via this summit might be some more human-to-human interaction, exchange, some cooperation on technological fields, scientific fields, where I think maybe South Korea and Japan might want this too, but I think they are more interested in securing regional stability, because they have upset China and Beijing because of all the military drills and all the close cooperation with the United States. And obviously Beijing is also interested in making sure that their neighboring countries are also cooperating with Beijing, so it's not South Korea and Japan against China, or democracy against authoritarianism, as some Chinese diplomats have also said. Moreover, I think Japan and South Korea is very interested in trying to make Beijing stop or halt the North Korean nuclear weapon development program that Beijing might have the ability to do, or at least to stop it from developing this quickly. So I think there are a lot of different interests at play. That's why the summit could be significant, but it may also just result in, just talks.
Right, the three sides definitely have different needs and wants and interests, but they could be approaching their common interests, like you mentioned, human-to-human exchanges or even economic interests. Now, shifting gears, Jack, Asia's most grand film festival, the Busan International Film Festival, is back for its 28th edition. Now, what makes this year's events special or different from the previous ones we've seen so far? Well,
it's been going through a period of turmoil. I think the lead movie, Why I Hate Korea, about social stratas and disparities and gender inequality. It acts as, in a way, a microcosm of what the festival has been going through over the last year, with a lot of infighting and troubles and what many call a self-inflicted management meltdown that's sent sponsors running and seen it conflict with the government. And certainly, so what we're seeing as a result of that is a stripped-down, leaner festival, with one host this year for the first time, famous actor here, Song Kang-ho, hosting the show. Nonetheless, pulling in plenty of stars, plenty of great movies, and sometimes a leaner festival can be a more vibrant festival. It doesn't. Sometimes it's about weeding out the chaff, and you just get the really good product. So. Even though there's been a lot of controversy leading up to it, even though we have a smaller festival this year, it still seems to be as vibrant as ever and as free as ever. We're seeing a lot of voices in there, a lot of great films, and yeah, one of, if not Asia's most important film festivals, still seems to be holding its ground despite all the hurdles.
Right, it is going through some turmoil time and hurdles like you mentioned, but it is just as eventful, I have to say. Now, Malene, the leading of the festival was Why I Hate Korea. It was the film based on the same novel by Jang Kang-myung. Now, please introduce us some of the movies that we have to watch.
Yes, so I think there are many great movies, and like there are so many movies to look forward to. So I have been choosing to focus on the movies by Asian directors. So one of them is The Moon by Yuya Ishii from Japan. And it is a social movie showing some of the social issues in Japan. It shows sanitary providing care for elderly and disabled people. So I think we can look forward to that because it'll shed light on some of the biggest issues in Japan right now. How do we provide care for the growing elderly population, and how is the society actually taking care of disabled people? I think there will definitely be some critique of the Japanese society in there. And Yuya Ishii is also a very established director, so it's one of the works that I think we can look forward to.
Definitely.
Another one is Lesser by Lee Sang-chul, from South Korea, and that's a little bit in the same field. It's a story about a man reflecting over how to raise his child that has some learning disabilities, and I think this is also showing some problems, some deep core problems in generally many East Asian societies where there might not be the same care and the same understanding for people who are having some learning difficulties or like disabilities. So I think that might also be a very interesting movie to watch from also an established director. Some of the new directors, or at least directors who are new on the fiction scene, is Choi Ji from China, who has made the movie Borrowed Time about Hong Kong. And I also think that will be very interesting to watch. It's a movie that reflects on how Hong Kong has evolved to what it is now. So I can imagine that it might be a very critical movie about what has happened with the 2019 democratic protests. How does Hong Kong look now compared to the more liberal, free, but also very Western-oriented society that we had just a few years ago? And the last movie that I would like to introduce as well is Heritage by South Korean Lee Jong-sung. And it is about a military or alternative social worker and how he works. And the story is about him and his supervisor. And I can imagine that there might be some maybe criticism about the military service and the way it is, the alternative ways of doing it, but how that might also create some kind of identity crisis or problem for the people choosing or maybe being forced to choose a different way, something, that's not the ordinary military service that all South Korean men usually have to do.
Definitely, and there are 290 more movies to, just pick and choose until the 13th of this month. All right, Malene, thank you so much for your time this afternoon, and always it was a pleasure to have you with us, Jack.
It's always a pleasure.
And we thank you for watching Issues and Insiders. Stay safe wherever you are and enjoy your weekend.